So it appears that I'm live. So if somebody can let me know, just send me a little note and let me know if you can hear me out there in Facebook land. I'd really appreciate it. I'm asking our fearless coordinator to check in so I know you guys can hear me. Can you guys hear me out there? It's about 20 seconds in, so I'm trying to make sure so we get a solid recording. Anybody? Or is everybody being non-punctual and showing up on poet time? Okay. Can anybody find me? It says I'm live. Nobody's saying anything. If you can, say hello. Because I know my audio is up. I don't hear anybody saying anything. Anybody? Yay, thanks, Laura. I'm glad you guys can hear me. Okay, so I'm going to give you a brief intro. This is our first reading for the Furious Flower Center on Facebook Live. I'm really excited to kick it off, but they have a set script of what they want me to tell you, so I'm going to start exactly with that and get into the poems. So here's the spiel. Thank you for watching the Furious Flower Facebook Live reading series. For those of you who don't know, the Furious Flower Poetry Center at James Madison University is the nation's oldest academic center dedicated to Black poetry. In the 25 years since the first Furious Flower Conference and the 15 years of the center's brick and mortar existence, Furious Flower programs have reached thousands of poets, educators, students, and poetry lovers around the world. From groundbreaking media and anthologies to children's creativity camps, summer seminars for educators, and decade-defining conferences. Furious Flower has impacted literary communities on local, regional, national, and international levels by creating platforms for Black poets to encounter their readers and for readers to experience and engage with the Black literary culture in new and exciting ways. For this and the next 2 Fridays in April, Furious Flower celebrates National Poetry Month by bringing you wonderful poets to enjoy at home. And I'm really excited to share all of this with you. My name is Tara Betts. I'm the author of Arc and Hue and Break the Habit in the forthcoming book Refuse to Disappear. I've been to the Furious Flower Conference and it was a life-changing experience. I recommend you go if you ever get a chance. And I'll start from there. I'm coming to you from Chicago, home. So let me get started reading, and then at the end, I'll take some questions. Okay? All right. So I'm clicking around a little bit because I do not use Facebook Live all the time. This is a new experience for me. So I'm going to read a couple poems from this, and I'm checking the comments. And you can only type. It's not going to be like a direct conversation. So to answer anybody's questions in the comments where they said you can only type, that's to answer that. And I should have marked these pages first. I didn't mark the pages first. Sorry, guys. Because there's a bunch of them in here. You know what? I'm going to start with the new poem because I think I got a little nervous since we were running into technical glitches. Or, yes, we can do this. Okay. I found a couple of them in this book. So I'm reading from Furious Flower, Seeding the Future of African American Poetry, edited by Joanne Gavin and Lauren Aline, with a foreword by Rita Dove. And the first two poems I want to share are, well, I'll tell you what the first poem is. After Andy Warhol's Little Race Riot, which is one of his famous pieces that's here in a museum in Chicago. The man in a straw fedora is not the center of a reproduced photograph, black and blue, like Louis Armstrong's plaintive query, black and white, like America being simple about every damn ingredient that fills its pot, often stirred by black hands. The man in a straw fedora is being chased to the margins. Two officers chase him, but the German shepherds are central in every movement in a country where darker bodies stand down with empty raised hands, and some will write, photograph, and paint the origami sharply unfolded in this silk-screened pair. Someone sees their cousins in the background where dogs are hardly restrained, and the protagonists on the right side of this story will be subjects, fodders for weapons and auctions still on repeat. The same photo rendered again to replicate how American horrors are great and how any riot rising is laughably not little. So I'm hoping the video isn't skipping. I keep getting this weird skip in the screen. If the visual is fine, let me know. Just be like, you're here with me, people. We're good. So I'm flipping around a little bit. I have a new poem today. I want to thank Lauren for coaxing it out of me, because I was talking it out and then I heard the poem and where it was coming from. I was like, that's it. So I wrote it down and typed it out to revise it this morning. And I was like, that is it. And I hope sometimes that's how you guys get poems too. Yeah, I'm wondering. Okay, I'm gonna read the second poem and just do that. This poem's called White Privilege. I was working on a series of poems that incorporated ideas where the word white came up, or ideas of whiteness. So I'm just trying to think, how can I embody that in some different ways? So this one's called White Privilege. Cold, hard angles keep you from touch at first. Fear does not stop you when your fingers claim edges. Learn silhouette, shake it to implosion, explosion. Maps are redrawn. You attach dainty clasps to fragments at your feet. Let them dangle at your throat and dance on your earlobes. There is no history here, only something new, a higher price tag. Someone has to clean up this mess for these people. And I wanted to share that one because, not just because it's in this book, but because it's also kind of pointing at this idea that it's like, you think you can fix something that doesn't need to be fixed, right? And that voice, that kind of smugness that comes with that kind of voice. So I'm going to read a couple poems from my new book, Refuse to Disappear. It still looks like this, and we'll go from there. I just feel like there were all these technical things we tried to catch up on beforehand, and it got a little jumbled just before I got on, so I didn't mark all of my pages like I normally do before reading. Um, let's see. I have a poem that's about Ella Fitzgerald that's in the new book, and um, in that poem, I'm talking about her experiences where she was in, they always talk about men being incarcerated in particular, but there was a point when Ella Fitzgerald was sent to um, a girls' home. They talk about, all the places where boys go, or you think about an old movie like The Education of Sonny Carson, or even more contemporary stuff like Michelle Alexander's The New Negro. And these stories just aren't being told, even at a time where Black women are being incarcerated at record numbers. So I wanted to do some poems talking about that, and this was one that really struck me, to hear this story about Ella Fitzgerald being in a in a girl's home, basically, that's like a juvenile prison. And this poem's called The Urchin's Work. Between dips and swings of syllables, Ella knew valleys between cheery notes. She carried a tisk 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 in a tisket a tasket, a yellow basket seemingly full of smiles until it could burst, and how she learned standards. She worked until teetering against impossible, as unwanted children often do. A cocoon of joy shielded her, a shell to block a stepfather's hands, a mother buried, a feeble aunt runs numbers, a track star through Harlem, until Ella became delinquent, sent to Hudson, a Sing Sing for girls, where she was courting quarantine, solitary, not in a choir reserved for white girls. Documents say that they don't have much on 1933, 1934, but there is a ledger bearing a committed colored girl's name. She ran like a number bedded in one of her aunt's books. Ella had no biography, no interviews about this time upstate. Her voice rewrote the tale. She never looked back. So how are you guys doing out there? I'm giving you a pause so you can comment now, because I'm having a hard time reading the comments on the side as they're coming, and I'll probably definitely read more of them once we get into the Q&A section. Anybody? No thoughts? I'm seeing lots of reactions, which is great. I'm glad y'all are there. I'm going to read this poem. I've been thinking a lot too about what's been happening in Baltimore, or what happened in Baltimore particularly. Okay. And I was thinking about this one image, because there were all these images of the protesters in Baltimore. And one of them was of a young woman. If you Google her name, it's Shamika Dream. And she's going down the line of soldiers in riot gear holding a smudge stick of sage. And I was just so struck with that image that I had to write a poem about it. So this is a poem for Shamika Dream. It's called Sage and Shields. On Baltimore's North Street, you smudged a line of officers with smoldering sage. No riot erupted in your face. A white line of gentle smoke, your scarf pointed toward them, a cleansing compass. You walked one end of the line to the other and embodied breeze. Black, green, yellow bracelets on your wrists, land, light, and skin remembered. Your lids lowered in prayers that every head under helmet and shield finds indecipherable. Your hair pulled back, water in your left hand, another way to cleanse and honor the dead. Officer shields held high, each man stood unknowing. You summoned. Those men will answer to another type of army. So that's Sage and Shields. I'm trying to, I don't know how to not turn the page too loudly. I hope it's not too loud, but let me change the tone a little bit. But you know, there was another poem that I was going to bring out. Okay. So this is one towards the end of the book. I'm still debating if I'm going to cut it out, but I think it might be interesting. I'm very happy that there's a scholar at Chicago State who's released Donda West's papers, who was the late mother of Kanye West. She was the head of the English department at Chicago State University. And I think the book is called Donda's Rules. Yes, it's called Donda's Rules. So it's her writing about rhetoric and the writing process and so on and so forth. Because those writings, some of them got published academically, but they've never been compiled into one book. And the only book she published while she was alive was called Raising Kanye, which was basically her memoir about raising her famous son. And I think we missed a valuable contribution in not having her talk about her own scholarship while she was still alive. But I've been thinking a lot about her because I feel like Kanye has just said things that are totally antithetical to how he was raised. I don't believe that. But anyway, I wish him well. I wish the babies well. And I'm going to read this poem because I was really not happy when he tried to say slavery was a choice. So here we go. Because hip hop, unlike slavery, was a choice. Because the art classes disappeared as buildings burned and ashes fluttered midair like insurance checks. Because the government claimed broken window theory where those animals could not avoid breaking everything. Because those animals had ancestors who knew slavery and colonialism like second and third languages, no ESL required. Because Robert Moses came through the borough like the expressway was his personal Bushido blade. Because mothers in the rundown apartments that survived collected small spears of vinyl joy. Because they were never ashamed to dance and always spoke in codes and rhythms, because breakbeats needed to be carried on spoken wings spread by MCs making people sweat, because aerosol cans rendered swirls in geometric orders and colors imagined by God's hands brushed across dusk, because there were no schools that agreed they were civilized, though their lives were burglarized daily, because Zora Neale Hurston interviewed the last surviving slave brought to America, but she couldn't profit from publication, because Black Benji died too young. So did DJ Scott LaRock, so did MC Trouble, so did Left Eye, so did B.I.G. and Tupac. Need I go on? Because Chicago made Shaka Khan, Curtis Mayfield, Muddy Waters, and Chess Records, and the city paints over them like fading murals. Because mothers of MCs are educators who learned the rhetoric of sit-ins, because eventually books and teachers documented languages and past obscured from textbooks, because writers struggle to keep books in print and others spend their last on fresh kicks because of the obvious sharecropping, Jim Crow, KKK, microaggressions, separate and still unequal paychecks, and misogynoir. Because de facto segregation stay holding hands with gentrification, since they've been tight like that from the first. Because Black and brown people always create seismic shifts that give them away to allow new fissures to crack, because someone always makes more money than The creators and estates revert back to people who ain't even family, because slavery is the favorite fodder of American movies where people love to watch suffering, because no matter what you buy, where you live, who you marry, or how much money you have, free thoughts are always contained. So I'm just looking, and I find that I'm going to try to go into this one poem. I do two poems and then go from there. So this is the new poem. It doesn't have a title yet. I'm open to suggestions, but I was talking to Lauren Aline yesterday, and I was telling her how amazing I think it is that as human beings have kind of uh, retracted from the environment, that all of these natural spaces are kind of reclaiming and healing from us not polluting. And the animals are like having a party. And I kept thinking about that. I was like, yeah, I said, these animals are tired of humans taking up space. So I kind of wrote a poem talking about that. I'm thinking about just calling it Taking Up Too Much Space. So I'll start with that. The animals are tired of humans taking up too much space, tired of leashes and gates as tiny prisons, pollution floating in the air and water, litter that smacks them in the face, plastic cutting their throats and bursting their stomachs. They don't speak languages that humans understand, so humans ignore them, talk over them, tell them to learn to speak human. Animals understand cages and humans who enjoy caging. Is anyone surprised when swans and dolphins returned to the waterways of Venice when cloudy filth and people disappeared? Goats gallivant on London streets and attack bushes like young punks fueled by the clash. Elephants in China brunch and nap in fields intoxicated on peace and corn cobs. The rhinos are still hunted on the continent. And how unsurprising is it that even the animals in South Africa get no reprieve, with the tourists who bring in money gone, and they keep the poachers at bay? Where are the rhinos' allies? But then I recall how humans take up too much space. How many times white people have crowded out not white people like animals. So we can't party, eat, sleep, drink, breathe, talk on a phone, or stand in our own living rooms. How people cannot talk to a friend without someone interrupting or mussing your hair or fur with their breath. Yes, animals understand humans taking up too much space better than some humans ever will. So that's the new poem. And I'll close with one other poem, trying not to shuffle the paper too loud. And this is the title poem from the forthcoming book. It's called Refuse to Disappear. It starts with epigraph by an LA legend who was part of the Watts Writers Workshop, Eric Priestley, and we used to correspond a whole lot. I don't know where he's been lately, but I hope he's okay. And I kept thinking about this excerpt from one of his poems, and I'll just read the quote in the poem. Refuse to disappear. The sunsets I saw are cluttered with the bones of these ashes. Time is the fire in which we burn. From Eric Priestley's Rage. The dawns I see burst with the ghosts of exhumed ruins. Plans are murderers in which we disappear. We are bent to follow the maze where wall turns into wall after wall, and we keep turning when we should climb. look over the wall, it gets more difficult to make them too high or hide a point of exit. Time may burn, but I refuse to disappear. So I'm hitting right about on the time to opening questions. I guess we can go from there. So if you guys have any thoughts, put your thoughts in the comments and I'm happy to chat with you. I see Rana is here. I'm looking to see who's responded. Wow, it's a lot of people. Hi, Timothy. Hi, Sequoia. Hi, Itiola. Hey, Ugochi. Anybody? Any questions? Yay. Thank you for shouting out my new book. Like, yay, Lauren. Hi, Miss Sonia. Miss Donaldson. I don't know if we've met. Hey, Abdullah Ali. One of the Baltimore folk. No questions? You guys just wanted to hear me talk. Is that what that is? Well, in any case, I could read another poem if you want me to. I just thought we'd have more of a conversation because I haven't been talking to people that much. Nobody? No questions. Okay. Because I did not put my book over here other than the new book. Nobody's going to say anything. Okay. No questions. I'm looking and there are no questions. Oh, okay. Now I'm seeing them. They were on the bottom. The new book, if I get everything done, Refuse to Disappear may be out in 2021. Thank you for asking, Etiola. When it's official, I'll let everybody know for sure. It's not official yet. Abdul Ali says, can you talk about the new project? What questions were you interested in exploring? Honestly, this book is kind of an amalgamation of poems that I've written since I've been home in Chicago. And I feel like there are some themes in it. Some of them are themes of just talking about Black women, talking about confinement, talking about hip hop, things that are personal and near and dear to me. Um, that's what I would probably summarize it as at this point. But I'm thinking about what does visibility look like too. You know, we've had that theme throughout Black literature, whether we talk about Ralph Ellison or, you know, um, there's a new book out called Invisible Women, which is more so talking about women in the digital sphere. So it's kind of a trip, but I'm hoping I can add a little bit to it, and it's almost done. So I have a comment from Sequoia Maynor. Thank you. Yes, I appreciate that. I think a lot of times we don't talk about the experience of Black women in the correctional systems and foster care. I would definitely like to write more about that. I think in a lot of ways it's more stressful and dehumanizing for women, especially when you think about issues like how women don't get, feminine products, even how women are sexually exploited in prisons. There's lots of different issues to talk about in corrections, especially as more and more Black women are being incarcerated. So I'm glad somebody heard that. Um, Sequoia also asked, what do you do to jumpstart your writing when you feel empty? The eternal question, right? Um, I find myself trying to absorb other art. So either I read, I watch movies, I listen to music, I go for a walk. Sometimes I eavesdrop on people's conversations. Because, you'll hear something and somebody says something so random and you just go, what? So I think it's good to have periods of absorption when you feel empty, right? Like, I haven't been writing a lot during the quarantine for that very reason. but I'm collecting ideas and they're starting to come. So I think that's an important question. Okay. Yes, Mary, we refuse to disappear. All right. I kind of answered a little bit of Ugochi's question. How has your writing been coming along during this COVID? Man, it's an absorption period, but I'm starting to write a little bit every day now. Probably because you get over the initial shock of kind of being contained in your own house. Um, Laura, can I ask about how you're managing to write now under current stresses? Does it feel more pressing than ever? I kind of feel like I'm pressed about other stuff and not really about writing, but I do think it's going to become more central for me as the days go by again. Um, I think sometimes we need writing just to make us feel like we're kind of releasing some of our stress or to, serve as a kind of outlet for what we're feeling in this time and space. But I'm also trying to think about how do I build a compelling image or a story or a turn that makes some large point that we're going to need after this happens. Because a lot of people force poets to write occasional poems. And I don't think that really, those poems get dated really easily. I'm like, how can you write a poem, say, like, I'm trying to think. It's something that transcends the moment, but it also captures the moment. So I've been thinking a lot about that. If that answers your question, Laura, I hope so. Um, and dear Dr. Gavin asked, who put out the book on Donda West? I do not remember it's a small publisher here in Chicago, and I cannot remember the editor's last name, but he's a professor at Chicago State. I can send it to you after the video so you guys can have it. Um, so the book Donda West is since Etiola asked a follow-up question for me to talk more about the book. Donda's Rules, I haven't read it in full detail, but as I said, she was the chair of the English department at Chicago State University. Dr. Kelly Norman Ellis now holds that position. And Dr. Donda West was an English scholar. Like, if you ever listen to Kanye West's Dear Mama, he talks about his mother, you know, being in the pages of books next to Nikki Giovanni. So instead of you just getting that one allusion to her writing life before she was in the public eye that way, um, you get to see some of her rhetorical writing, some of her writing about creative writing. It's basically a lot of pedagogical writing. So I haven't read it in depth. I just skimmed through it. I definitely hope that you guys will check it out. I believe the editor's name is Gerard McClendon, and it's called Donda's Rules. Donda apostrophe S Rules. So I hope you guys will check it out. And the earlier book, Raising Kanye, I believe you can find it free as a PDF online. So it's kind of like a pop biography of her life with Kanye. So I hope that answers your question, Etiola. I'm not sure what you mean with your question of renewal in the poem for oh, that's your title idea. Thank you. I appreciate that. Mary Henson, I just saw Trevor Noah talking about the insanely high, relatively high numbers of African American and incarcerated. How am I dealing with the fact of incarcerated people being infected with COVID-19? Thank you for your question, Mary. Up until March 7th, I was teaching at Stateville Prison, which is a maximum security facility for men just south of Chicago. And a lot of them, some of them have, I won't say some, a lot of them have significant health problems. Some of those problems have not been adequately addressed by healthcare institutions or the state, in part because they're often treated like they're dispensable. It's been very challenging. to not be able to communicate with my students. A lot of really grounded and wonderful people have been protesting throughout Chicago and in other parts of the country to release elderly prisoners and people who are at health risk in some ways in prisons, and in particular at Stateville. They just had a protest today, or they're about to have one today. Um, I'm not at liberty to say how that's being organized, but it will be peaceful and social distancing will be practiced. So I I'm just at a loss for words. I'm hoping that we can get hand sanitizer and soap to those people, but we don't know what's really going to happen. And I was trying to reassure them that they should be safe, and then we got cut off from contact. So it's really difficult for me as a teacher to know my students are in mortal danger. And I don't know who's going to be alive when I come back to teach. So I think this is an important time to take a beat and also think about what we can still be doing for people who are on the inside that we care about. So thanks again, Mary. Um, yes, Laura, I would love to see your work about the scholarly project where it's the problems of writing occasional poems. We should talk about that. And Emilio, thanks for jumping in on that as well. And I do think Emilio Maldonado is talking about how artists filter their lives already as humans, but the choices we make become our work. And I completely agree. Sometimes I feel like it's good to be silent. Like, I know Audre Lorde told us silence, there are so many silences to be broken, right? But sometimes I think we're so quick to be in motion, we don't think about just to catch a breath, just to think for a minute and pay close attention to something so you make the most effective step possible. And I think sometimes we do that with poems too. Like I said, if we rush to do the occasional poem so that we're timely and newsworthy, we miss some aspect of what that poem could do to have a much longer impact. So I do think about that, you know. And yeah, I I always keep my students in my thoughts, Miss Jones. Yes. Um I I think sometimes my students have been more valuable to me than my peers in terms of reminding me of where writing goes as a influence in how we move in the world. If we didn't have I was talking to some students that I taught in Florida, and we still meet. They're here in Illinois, but we did a workshop together in Florida, and I said, students are so important. Younger writers are so important. And they're like, what you talking about, Dr. Betts? And I said, well, there will be a day when I'm not here anymore. And I have a long time before I get there, I'd like to think. But as a writer, you should be thinking about, what is your legacy? When you leave your body of work behind, are you going to do something just because you wanted to get published or you wanted to win a prize, or because you said the valuable thing that you felt deeply needed to be said? And I'll leave it at that. But I see we have another comment from Dr. Gavin. She says, let us know how we can help. Um, the organization that I work with here in Chicago is called the Prison and Neighborhood Arts Project. They have been collecting donations. They have been actively contacting distilleries to get hand sanitizer. They've been bringing soap and hand sanitizer to the prison. We will be sending educational packets to our students so that they can at least have some kind of activities to take their mind off of their situation. It's my understanding that at one point they were on 24/7 lockdown. And I want people to understand that, I understand prison is a punishment for sometimes people who have done things that were not the right thing to do, right? But I also think it's not always black and white like that. Um, so I hope that you will look at that and think of that as you think about ways to support. So Prison Neighborhood Arts Project, their website, I believe, is pnap.org. Their Twitter is at Arts Prison. So a lot of people are actively checking that, and they're also on Instagram. So if that's a quick way for you to get in touch with them, their Facebook page is their full name, Prison and Neighborhood Arts Project. And you can get in touch with them, and they're posting ways to help people that if you can do that. There's also an organization here called Parole Illinois. And in particular, they've been doing a lot of work to reinstitute parole because there is no official parole in the state of Illinois. So imagine you have prisons, predominantly African American and Latino populations, and there's no hope for parole. It's a really problematic system. So I hope that answers your questions. I'm getting all these comment bubbles that are covering the comments. Okay. Furious Flower Poetry Center. Talk about some ways that poetry has impacted your students in prison in particular. I think I may not be as rigid as some people they may have encountered in other educational settings. As someone who has really engaged in thinking about how can I carry the pedagogy of June Jordan and Paulo Freire into the classroom, I try to meet them where they're at. I believe they bring stuff to the table. And sometimes for them, that's the one affirmation they have not had in an educational setting. But the thing I like is that they bring a lot of stuff to me because they're so engaged as students. They're not there for a credit or a grade. They're really excited to be engaged in the process. So for me, I get to share books that I love because typically they like a lot of the stuff that I read. Some of it they'll say is strange, but once they see that it's not something that's beyond their capacity, they're like, this is all right, Dr. Betts. So I think for some of them, it's become partially a therapeutic space and a safe space. Um, in terms of what they get out of the poetry, some of them are way more open to things that, they don't think it's just a dead white man's language anymore. And to me, that's a really valuable thing. And seeing how the importance of detail transcends being able to write a legal brief. So we've had that conversation as well. It's like, how many of you are writing legal documents? And if you leave certain details out, it puts you in a particular predicament, or it affects how people perceive the story or the argument that you're telling. And they were like, oh, I never thought about it like that. So that's one of the things that has come up in terms of talking about poetry is choosing a detail can make such a crucial turn in a poem. So that's one of the ways I think it has impacted my students. And two, the fact that they see Black and Latino writers writing about things, that they've seen incarcerated people write amazing poems and amazing stories, has been huge in terms of feeling like I could do that too. And the last thing I'd probably say is, and this is how they impact me more than anything, I I appreciate their sense of humor. They're hilarious. And I find that people who find the capacity to laugh, even in insanely repressive conditions, teach us something about how to stay human. And is that what poets try to do? We try to stay human. Um, I'm gonna not ramble too much. I see Enzo Surin, who has a new book coming out very, very soon. Um, he says, I wonder if you can speak the balance of contemporary canon and the new poets, books that have literally just come out, when discussing poetry with your students. Um, I think it's important to read a balance. I do feel like some students, or rather, I won't just say students, I think there's a lot of poets, contemporary, like people who are still alive, who are way more interested in reading each other and their intimate friend circle, or the people who have been already accepted as the acceptable names to drop. And I think in order to be the strongest poet you can, read broadly, read widely, read the stuff that people says, I don't think you would read that. I'm like, nah, that's, you're free. You know, if there's any one way a poet can be free, is you do not have to read what everybody says is the book to read. And one of the things that I did as a young poet in Chicago was I used to live in Harold Washington Library. And if you've never been to Harold Washington Library, it's this big, beautiful public library. And in that library, they have a really awesome poetry collection. And even when I didn't have a library card or I had library funds, I I would go pull out a stack of books and just read all day. And a lot of the books I loved were never taught in MFA programs. A lot of the books I loved, I didn't learn about till I wanted to be a scholar on Black literature myself. And then I met other people who wanted to explore it deeply like me. But it's really shameful how there's so many books that get left out of the canon, right? And sometimes you have to realize that certain institutions have their own canon, certain instructors have their own canon, and they may have a blind spot. So kill your blind spots. Read the stuff that nobody expects you to know about. So I'll say that. Curtis has a comment. Curtis Crisler, he teaches at a university in Indiana, really good poet. He says students need to know that they bring something to the university college. They bring their voice and what's behind it. So they aren't just getting knowledge from the school, they are bringing knowledge to the school as well. I absolutely agree. I think that's one of the main things. That's why I was talking about Freire earlier. So we're just time. If you guys have one more question. Oh, we do. We have one last question. Um, Talk about the relationship between being a scholar of Black lit and a practitioner of poetry. Um, the funny thing is before I ever got a degree, I felt like I was trying to do both. Um, my first One of my first academic presentations was at a Furious Flower conference. I did a paper on teaching short forms and poetic forms by communities and cultures of color. And it was so funny because I did this paper and people were asking me, what institution are you at? I said, I'm not, I'm an independent scholar. And I just made that up on the fly. But the whole thing is I really was an independent scholar. And I was reading deeply. I was asking questions. I was making correlations. Once you start knitting things together, that's what poets really do. When you're metaphor building and image making, you're making these connections where things intimately link to each other, right? So you can think about how one image seems very unlike another thing, and then somehow they pair, like, and they just fit together. I always think about that because Robert Bly's book Leaping Poetry, he talks a lot about that, like this idea of unlike things kind of coming together. um, so for me, I don't think it's ever been separate. For me to teach writing and to teach these writers that I loved, I felt like I had to learn more about the literature and how it was structured and its intent and the time period in which it was created and the biographies of those writers. And that's what scholars really do. They analyze all of that information and try to say, okay, this is how it makes a larger impact. This is how it creates a theme. This is how it explains a time period. This is how it appeals to its audience? What are its rhetorical thrusts? So for me to think about all of that made it really possible for me to think about, how do I teach how to do this poem? How do I teach a discussion around this poem? How do I teach people to write their own poems and get them to think about these questions with their own work? So I think for me, it's kind of been inseparable to talk about being scholarly with Black literature and writing my own poetry as a Black poet. Um, I'm looking, there's a comment about Jimmy Santiago Baca and his memoir, A Place to Stand. He talked about a decision he made while he was in prison that made him become a writer. My colleague, Sammy Bordeaux, used his book in her class at Sinte Gleska University. Have you shared this book with your students? I have not taught that book. I've taught a couple of his poems. I would love to teach Baca. I think he's a sharp writer. Um, I've taught his essay Coming into Language many, many times, just because I think it's one of those essays that affirms what it means to see something like you in written form. So I recommend that essay a lot. But thank you. I have a place to stand on the shelf. I just haven't assigned it yet. Emilio Maldonado says he has LPs from Harold Washington Library he won't give back. Dude, give those albums back. Digitize them and return them. Yeah, definitely read broadly, kill your blind spots. Charlie Parker apparently listened to country music from a jukebox in a jazz club. And cats were wondering what was wrong with him. Why you playing that stupid music? He said, listen, listen, listen to the stories. Right. And I just want to be like, okay, I'm not a huge country music fan. This is very random and not related to poetry per se. But country music is really a descendant of the blues, in my opinion. It's really similar themes. It's kind of similar class structures in some ways. A lot of stuff about relationships, people getting done wrong, people feeling bad. It's like, but it's just a different cultural strain, the way it's expressed in America, and it's all American music. So, something to think about. you know, Maybe Charlie Parker was on the right path with a little bit of something, right? I'd like to think so. I just heard, I'll make this one comment. Uh, I know Questlove has been doing these live DJ sets on YouTube Live, and I'm totally enamored with them. I've been tuning in every night. And last night he did this set where he was sharing, it's towards the end, he played this one Shaka Khan song where she reinterprets several jazz musicians, including Charlie Parker, Thelonious Monk, and a little bit of John Coltrane. And she creates lyrics to go with the vocalese that is comparable to the music by these musicians. And I was like, man. So, and of course, I mean, if you follow Questlove, he's always doing amazing. Yes, Sequoia, the Questlove sets have been phenomenal. I know everybody's all about D Nice, and DJ Clark Kent's been doing sets. Ninth Wonder, who does a lot of work with Mark Anthony Neal, has done a set or two. But no, I'm like, Questlove is interesting because he'll give you lessons on the records and certain music history lessons as the songs are interspersed. So if you haven't checked that out, there's a book I was going to recommend. Hold on. So I'll probably do a video about this book, but this is one of Questlove's music books. It's called Soul Train, The Music, Dance, and Style of a Generation by Questlove. I love this book. And so there's like little snippets in that book, or if you go and read his book Mo Meta Blues, he really should be teaching classes that are like music history. It's amazing. I'm so glad we have him as a treasure. And yeah, check out those free sets on YouTube. It's like a perfect mix of music and education. So I'm thinking I should go and close with that. I'm gonna. I really appreciate all your questions. It was really good to get started and have this combo with you. I hope you will check out the other readings. So I'll just hit it off with this. Thank you so much for tuning in for the Furious Flower Facebook Live reading series. I hope you enjoyed the reading. Tune in again on next Friday, April 17th at 2 p.m., 1 p.m. CST time, because he's also in Chicago, right here, and hear poet Roger Bonary Gard. Also, during National Poetry Month, Furious Flower is holding a quarantine Kwansaba contest. For more details about this and other Furious Flower programs and resources, visit www.jmu.edu/Furious Flower. Once again, that is www.jmu.edu/Furious Flower, or check them on social media. Thank you. Stay safe and healthy, and be blessed.